Some storms destroy, others reveal. In October 1875, on the wild plains of Montana, Martha Green watched the last stalks of wheat dance in a biting wind that carried the scent of winter to come. A widow for 6 months, she was still holding up this small ranch which seemed ready to crumble with every gust. Martha Green laid her calloused hand on the peeling wood of the door and watched the horizon, where the sun was drowning in ash-colored clouds. The October wind already carried the promise of a merciless winter, and she knew their little ranch wasn't ready to face it. Inside the kitchen with its rough-hewn wooden walls, Nora, her 12-year-old daughter, stirred a meager stew in the cast-iron pot. Her brown hair was carefully braided, and despite her patched clothes, she carried herself with a dignity Martha had striven to instill in her children. Will, all of 10 years old, was clumsily patching up a wobbly chair by the hearth, his small hands already nimble despite his young age. "Mama, we've got enough flour for 3 days," Nora announced, her steady voice betraying a maturity far beyond her years. Martha nodded without turning around. 3 days. She'd learned to count the days since William's death, each sunrise a victory snatched from adversity. The ranch that had once fed a prosperous family was now just a collection of gray planks and shattered dreams. The few cows left in the corral grew thinner by the day, and the wheat field looked more like a plant graveyard than a promise of harvest. The wind suddenly picked up, rattling the shutters and whistling through the ill-fitting planks. Martha closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This land still carried William's scent, that essence of sage and leather that had accompanied her through 15 years of happiness. But tonight, the wind also carried something else, an electric charge that announced the storm. "Clouds are gathering in the west," Will observed, abandoning his repair to join his mother by the window. Martha laid her hand on her son's slender shoulder. These children had grown up too fast, learned too early to read the signs in the sky and measure the future in bread rations. Yet, in their eyes still shone that spark of hope she fought so hard to protect. "We'll hold on," she murmured, as much for them as for herself. Outside, the first lightning bolt tore through the purple sky, and thunder rumbled in the distance like the voice of an angry giant. The storm was coming, and with it, perhaps, the change Martha no longer dared to hope for. Does this story already touch your heart? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The rest of the story promises revelations that will change Martha's destiny forever. The storm hit with incredible violence around midnight. Gusts of wind howled like hungry wolves, shaking the small house to its foundations. Martha had gotten up 3 times to check that the shutters were holding, while Nora and Will huddled under their worn wool blankets, eyes wide open in the dark. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky a leaden gray, a strange calm settled over the ranch. Martha stepped outside to assess the damage, a few planks torn from the barn, the well partially blocked by branches, but nothing irreparable. That's when she saw Nora and Will running towards her from the wheat field, their faces pale with emotion. "Mama, Mama," Nora cried, her voice carried by the wind that kept blowing in gusts. "There's a man, over there near the stalks." Martha's heart clenched. Times were hard and drifters were common on the roads of Montana. Some sought work, others trouble. She grabbed William's old rifle, hanging near the door, and followed her children with a determined stride. The man lay face down between the rows of yellowed wheat, his farmer's clothes soaked and stained with a mix of mud and dried blood. No horse on the horizon, no saddle, no satchel, just an immobile body whose labored breathing weakly lifted his shoulders. Martha approached cautiously, rifle ready. "He's hurt," Will whispered, his child's voice trembling with a natural compassion that the harshness of their lives hadn't yet stifled. Martha knelt beside the stranger and gently laid her hand on his feverish forehead. Beneath her fingers, she felt life fighting against something darker. The man was young, maybe 35, with calloused working hands and a several-day-old beard that couldn't hide the features drawn with suffering. "Help me carry him inside," she suddenly decided, surprising her own children. "But Mama, we don't know him," Nora protested softly, worry piercing her voice. Martha looked at her daughter, then at the body abandoned by the storm, and something deep stirred within her. Maybe it was the memory of William, who had also needed help once. Or maybe it was that fundamental humanity that poverty hadn't managed to strip away from her. "Exactly," she replied, slipping an arm under the man's shoulder. "We don't know who he is, but we know who we are." Together, they dragged the stranger to the house. Martha set up a makeshift mattress by the hearth, while Nora prepared cool compresses and Will stoked the fire. The wind continued to moan through the planks, as if wanting to remind Martha that this man had been brought to her by the storm. In his feverish delirium, the stranger mumbled incomprehensible words, speaking of a place called Dusty Ridge Ranch, and repeating a name with heart-wrenching pain. June. June. Martha listened to these involuntary confessions, wiping the man's forehead, wondering what tragedy could have led him to their dying wheat field. For 3 days, the man burned with fever. Martha watched over him with a mother's patience, wiping his forehead, moistening his dry lips with herbal decoctions she kept carefully in glass jars. The October wind still blew, sometimes carrying the scent of early snow that made the walls of the small house shiver. Nora and Will had gotten used to the stranger's presence. The boy had even started talking to him, recounting his day in a soft voice, as if hoping his words could penetrate the mists of unconsciousness. Nora, more reserved, watched her mother with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You're using our last sage tea," she remarked one evening, seeing Martha prepare another decoction. "It'll grow back in the spring," Martha replied without looking up from her work. "What if he doesn't wake up?" Martha paused for a moment, her hand suspended over the steaming cup. It was a legitimate question, one from a child who had learned too early to calculate survival in spoonfuls of flour and logs of wood. But something in the sleeping man's face spoke to her of a suffering that went beyond his physical wounds. "Then we'll have done what was right," she said simply. On the 4th morning, Martha woke before dawn, drawn by an unusual silence. The wind had died down during the night, and a strange quiet reigned in the house. She approached the mattress by the hearth and discovered 2 gray-blue eyes looking at her with new clarity. "Morning," the man rasped. Martha felt an immense relief wash over her, mixed with an unexpected shyness. This stranger she'd nursed for 3 days suddenly became an unknown again, a man she knew nothing about. "How are you feeling?" she asked, stepping back slightly. He tried to sit up, wincing from the effort. "Alive thanks to you, I suppose." His gaze swept the modest room, stopping on the curious faces of Nora and Will, who appeared in their doorway. "I'm Jack Carter. Martha Green. These are my children, Nora and Will." Jack Carter. The name didn't ring a bell, but she noticed the way he said his own name, with a kind of weariness, as if carrying an invisible burden. "You found me in your fields? After the storm. You were unconscious, injured." Martha hesitated. "You mentioned a place, Dusty Ridge Ranch, and a woman named June." Jack's face instantly shut down, and Martha regretted mentioning those confessions extracted by delirium. A deep pain crossed his gray-blue eyes, and she understood she'd just touched an open wound. "Dusty Ridge, that's my home," he finally said. "Well, it was my home." He fell silent for a long moment, his gaze lost towards the window where the nascent dawn painted the sky pale pink. June was my fiancée. She died last summer." The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief. Martha knew that pain, that feeling of being amputated from a part of herself. She sat on the wobbly chair Will had repaired, and for the first time in months, she no longer felt alone with her sorrow. Over the next few days, Jack gradually regained his strength. Martha had initially insisted he stay in bed, but the man proved to be an impossible patient. As soon as he could stand without swaying, he started making himself useful, fixing what he could with the meager tools available. The October wind had picked up again, but gentler this time, carrying the autumnal scent of fallen leaves and earth preparing for winter. Jack worked outside despite the chill, and Martha sometimes watched him from the kitchen window, intrigued by this man who clearly hid secrets behind his skilled hands. "Mr. Carter," Will called out one morning, seeing him repair the corral fence. "Do you really know horses well?" Jack paused his work and smiled at the boy. "I grew up with them. My father used to say a man's worth is the worth of his horse." "Papa said the same thing," Will whispered, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Did you have a lot of horses at Dusty Ridge?" Jack's smile clouded slightly. "Enough, yeah, it's a big ranch, or it used to be." He firmly drove a post into the hardened ground. "Now I'm not too sure what's left of it." Martha, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "What happened, Jack? If you don't mind me asking." Jack put down his tools and wiped his hands on his pants. His gaze drifted to the horizon where the hills undulated under the gray sky. "Some men want my land. They think it's a shame for a single man to hold on to such a big spread." His voice hardened. "They started with offers, then threats. The night you found me, I'd had a heated discussion with some of them." "You mean they attacked you?" Martha's voice vibrated with indignation. "Let's just say they wanted to convince me to leave." Jack instinctively touched his side, where his clothes had been stained with blood. "I managed to escape, but my horse, they shot him. I walked for hours in the storm before collapsing." Nora, who had remained silent near the barn, suddenly approached. "Then why don't you leave, if it's so dangerous?" Jack looked at her with a seriousness that surprised Martha. "Because this land has carried my family's history for 40 years. My father cleared it. My mother planted the first garden here. June," he broke off, swallowing hard. "June wanted to raise our kids here. I can't just give all that up to vultures who only see money." Martha felt something clench in her chest. That determination, that loyalty to roots and memories, she recognized it. It was exactly how she felt about this small, dilapidated ranch that had sheltered her happiness with William. "What are their names?" she asked. "The man behind all this is Elias Granger. He owns half the local bank's capital and dreams of buying all the land in the valley to resell it to the railroad company." Jack picked up his tools. He's got money, power, and no scruples. The wind suddenly picked up, slamming the barn door and kicking up dust in the corral. Martha shivered, but not just from the cold. She had a feeling Jack Carter's troubles were about to become theirs. Martha's predictions proved true 2 days later. She was hanging laundry behind the house when the sound of hooves echoed in the yard. 3 men on horseback stopped in front of the porch, their silhouettes stark against the autumn sky. The wind carried the scent of dust stirred up by their mounts, and something more unsettling: arrogance. Martha quickly gestured for Nora and Will to go inside, then stepped towards the visitors, her hands still damp from the wash. Jack was out in the fields, repairing a collapsed section of fence. "Ma'am," said the oldest of the 3, tipping his hat slightly. He was a corpulent man with a ruddy face and small, calculating eyes. "I'm Samuel Morrison, from Mr. Granger's office. We're looking for a man who might have passed through here." "I don't get many visitors," Martha replied, crossing her arms over her chest. "A brown-haired man, about 35, rather tall. He might have been injured." Morrison scrutinized Martha's face. "His name's Jack Carter." Martha met his gaze without flinching. Inside, her heart hammered, but her voice remained steady. "I don't know who you're talking about." One of the younger men moved his horse forward a few steps. "We know he's been lurking around. He got away from us after a misunderstanding. Mr. Granger just wants to have a word with him. If it was just a conversation, you wouldn't have come 3 deep." Martha observed with a calm that surprised even herself. Morrison smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're sharp, Mrs. Green. Yes, we know who you are. A courageous widow with 2 children to feed." He paused. "Mr. Granger respects people like you. He might even be generous if you prove cooperative." The wind blew harder, snapping the damp laundry on the line. Martha felt anger rise in her, that flame she'd learned to contain since William's death but which still burned. "And if I'm not? That'd be a shame," Morrison said, looking around with false pity. "Such a nice little ranch. A bit run down, sure, but with potential. Unfortunately, times are tough. Accidents happen. Fires too." Martha didn't flinch, but her hands tightened on her arms. Behind the men, she glimpsed a figure quietly sneaking towards the back of the house. Jack must have seen the visitors and was hiding. "I'm telling you again, gentlemen, I don't know any Jack Carter." Morrison studied her face for another moment, then signaled to his companions. "We might be back, just in case your memory improves." He turned his horse. "Take care, Mrs. Green, and of your children." The 3 men galloped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust that the wind slowly dispersed. Martha remained still until the sound of hooves completely vanished. Then her legs began to tremble. Jack emerged from his hiding place, his face grim. "I'm sorry, Martha. I never should have stayed. I'm putting you in danger." She turned to him, and for the first time in months she no longer felt alone against adversity. "No, Jack. For the first time in a long time I feel alive. That night, Martha couldn't find sleep. She stayed seated by the window, peering into the darkness while the October wind whispered through the house planks. Jack had insisted on sleeping in the barn, arguing he needed to keep watch, but she knew he felt guilty for putting them in harm's way. In the early morning, she found him by the well, washing his torn clothes. "You leaving?" she asked simply. Jack lifted a tortured gaze to her. "I have to, Martha. Those men will be back, and next time, they won't just make threats." "And you think running will solve the problem?" Martha sat on the well's edge. "Granger will get your ranch and then he'll turn to other lands, maybe mine." Jack froze, hands in the cold water. "What do you mean?" "That we're stronger together." The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but she knew immediately they were right. "Your ranch is threatened by greed, mine by poverty. Separately, we'll lose everything. Together, we can lose twice as much." Jack finished bitterly. Martha stood up and approached him. "Or we can save twice as much." She hesitated, then gently laid her hand on his arm. "Jack, I've spent 6 months just surviving. Counting the days, the rations, the pennies. Yesterday, facing those men, I found something I thought died with William. The will to fight." The wind suddenly picked up, making the branches of the old oak near the house dance. Jack looked at this woman offering him her support despite all she'd already lost, and something unclenched in his chest. "Dusty Ridge isn't in good shape," he confessed. "Granger and his men sabotaged several fences, poisoned a well, and I barely have enough left to feed the cattle until winter. Then we'll go there," Martha declared, with a determination that surprised even herself. "We'll bring our cows, our tools, our strength. We'll fix what can be fixed." Nora and Will, who'd been listening from the doorway, approached shyly. "Mama," Nora said, "what does that mean for us?" Martha looked at her children, then Jack, then the horizon where unknown hills loomed. "It means we're going to stop just enduring and start acting, that we're going to defend something worth fighting for." Will nodded seriously. Papa would have liked that. Jack felt his throat tighten. These people he'd known for barely a week offered him more than just help. They offered him a family, a reason to keep going. "And June would have too," he murmured. Martha understood that was his way of accepting. She reached out her hand to Jack, and when he took it, she felt something new beginning. Not a replacement for what they'd lost, but a different, unexpected continuation. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Jack replied, "before Granger figures out what's going on." Dusty Ridge Ranch appeared around a bend in the hill like a shattered mirage. Martha gripped the reins of the old wagon and gazed at what had been, just months earlier, one of the finest spreads in the valley. The building still stood, but barely. Torn-off planks hung like broken arms. The big barn had lost half its roof, and the fences stretched in sections, some straight, others collapsed. The wind swept the main yard, kicking up whirlwinds of dust and dead leaves. Jack, who rode beside the wagon, had been silent since they'd left the main road. Martha saw the pain on his face, that suffering of finding his home so ravaged. "It's even bigger than I imagined," Nora whispered, jumping down from the wagon. Will ran to the main corral, his eyes shining with excitement despite the state of the place. "There's room for 100 horses here." Jack dismounted and tied his horse to a still sturdy post. "There used to be 50 before." His voice was hoarse. "My father broke them all himself." Martha approached the main house, a wood and stone structure that retained a certain dignity despite the damage. The shutters rattled in the wind, and a few panes were broken, but the foundations seemed solid. "Show me inside," she told Jack. The door creaked open onto a spacious hall. Despite the dust and a few overturned pieces of furniture, Martha could imagine what this home had once been. A warm hearth, filled with laughter and plans for the future. She gently touched the mantelpiece, where a few personal items still lay. "June chose these curtains," Jack said, pointing to the torn drapes at the windows. She said the blue reminded her of the morning sky. Martha nodded, saying nothing. She understood that pain of finding traces of lost happiness. In her own home, she still kept William's favorite cup, one she couldn't bring herself to use or put away. "We'll start by fixing the barn roof," she decided practically. "We need shelter for the animals before winter." Jack looked at her, surprised by her readiness to take charge. "Martha, you don't have to—" Yes, I am, she interrupted firmly. We're here. We're staying. This land is worth fighting for. Outside, Nora had discovered the remains of a vegetable patch and was examining the surviving plants. There are still some gourds, she cried. And look, wild mint. Will, meanwhile, had found a half-wild kitten mewing near the barn. He's hungry, he observed, picking it up gently. Can we keep him? If he'll have us, Jack replied with the first genuine smile Martha had seen from him since they arrived. The wind changed direction, suddenly carrying a softer scent, that of grass and damp earth. Martha looked up at the sky where clouds were gathering, promising rain. The storm led us here, she told Jack. Maybe it was time this house knew life again. Jack looked at this courageous woman who'd left her modest security to help him save a dream he'd thought lost. June would have liked to know you, he said softly. And William would have appreciated this place, Martha replied. They're probably watching us, wondering why it took us so long to meet. The weeks that followed transformed Dusty Ridge Ranch. From dawn, Martha and Jack worked side by side, repairing what neglect and malice had damaged. October's wind had given way to November's first frosts, and every day counted to prepare for winter. Nora revealed an unexpected talent for accounts and organization. She kept a notebook where she meticulously recorded repairs made, provisions needed, and the cattle's progress. We've saved enough to buy 2 new cows, she announced one morning, her calculations spread out on the renovated kitchen table. Will, meanwhile, seemed born for carpentry. Under Jack's patient guidance, he learned to handle tools with surprising precision for a 10-year-old. Together, they'd rebuilt half the fences and reinforced the barn's framework. You've got your father's hands, Martha observed, watching her son perfectly adjust a straight plank. And his mother's eye, Jack added with a smile. He sees problems before they happen. Martha felt a strange warmth wash over her at his words. Since William, no man had spoken of her children with such natural tenderness. Jack wasn't trying to replace their father. He was building something new, different, but just as precious. In the evenings after work, all 4 of them gathered in the living room where Martha had replaced June's torn curtains with simple white linen drapes. Jack's old pain seemed to soften little by little, without completely vanishing. He now spoke of June with tenderness rather than with that heartbreaking agony that silenced him. She wanted beehives. He recounted one evening, poking the fire. She used to say honey was the only truly sweet thing in this tough life. We can set some up in the spring, Martha suggested. Nora's read books on beekeeping. It had become their way of talking about the future. We. The word came out naturally now, carrying with it the hope of a shared tomorrow. One late November morning, neighbors appeared on the horizon. Martha stepped out onto the porch, worried, but Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Those are the Hendersons and the McCreadys, he said. Good folks. The 3 families arrived with tools and provisions. Tom Henderson, a sturdy man with a sun-weathered face, warmly shook Martha's hand. We heard someone finally got this ranch back on its feet, he said with a wide smile. It's about time. His wife Ellen hugged Martha like an old friend. Granger tried to convince us Jack had abandoned the valley. We're glad to see he was wrong. The McCreadys had brought their teenage sons, and soon the ranch echoed with the sounds of collective work. The wind carried laughter and conversations, creating an atmosphere of working celebration. Why are they doing this? Nora asked Ellen Henderson. Because that's how it works in a real community, the woman replied, kneading bread dough. We help each other out. Granger forgot that, but we didn't. That evening, when the neighbors left, Martha looked at the transformed ranch and understood something essential. They weren't alone anymore. The first snow fell one December morning, transforming the landscape into a silent, pure tableau. Martha stood at the kitchen window, a mug of hot coffee in her hands, watching the flakes dance in the light wind. The ranch was unrecognizable. The buildings repaired, fences straight, smoke steadily rising from the main chimney. We did it, she murmured to herself. Jack came in carrying an armload of wood, his boots leaving wet tracks on the clean floor. The animals are sheltered, the fodder's enough until spring. He put the wood by the hearth and approached Martha. You look thoughtful. I was just thinking about 6 months ago. I was alone in my little house, counting the days and the rations. She turned to him. I didn't recognize the woman I'd been with William anymore. I felt like I'd become a ghost. Jack understood that feeling. After June's death, he'd spent months wandering his own house like a stranger, unable to find his place in his own life. And now? He asked softly. Now I feel alive. Different from who I was before, but alive. She hesitated, then added, I still miss William, but it's not that paralyzing pain anymore. It's become gratitude for what we had, for what he taught me. Outside, Nora and Will were building a snowman near the barn, their laughter carried by the gentle wind blowing from the valley. The kitten, named Courage by Will, followed them, bounding through the fresh snow. I miss June too, Jack said. But you taught me something, Martha. You can honor the dead by continuing to live, not just by staying faithful to them in sadness. Martha placed her hand on Jack's, a gesture that had become natural over the weeks. What are we building, Jack? A family, he replied without hesitation. Not like the ones we lost, but something new. Something that resembles them in some ways. At that precise moment, the wind brought the sound of galloping horses. Martha and Jack exchanged a worried look. Since settling at Dusty Ridge, they'd lived in relative peace, but they knew Granger hadn't given up. Jack went to take down his rifle, but Martha stopped him. Let's wait and see who it is. Tom Henderson appeared in the yard, his horse frothing with sweat despite the cold. He dismounted and ran towards the house. Jack, Martha, he cried. They're coming. Granger and at least 6 men. They said they're coming to take back what's theirs. Martha's stomach clenched, but not from fear. It was a different feeling, stronger. Determination. How long? Jack asked. An hour, maybe less. They took the main road. Jack turned to Martha. You need to leave with the children. Take the wagon, go to the Hendersons. No, Martha said with a firmness that surprised even herself. This time we're not running. This land is as much mine as it is yours now. The wind suddenly picked up, making the windows rattle and the roof groan, as if even the elements sensed the coming confrontation. Martha, Jack began. We're family, she interrupted, echoing her own words. Families don't abandon each other. The riders arrived like a storm cloud, kicking up fresh snow under their mounts' hooves. Elias Granger rode at the front, an elegant man with graying hair, dressed in a black wool coat that contrasted with the white landscape. His cold eyes swept over the renovated ranch with a mix of surprise and anger. Martha, Jack, Nora, and Will stood on the porch, forming a compact group facing the intruders. The wind blew in gusts, snapping their clothes and carrying the metallic scent of snow and tension. Carter, Granger said, stopping a few yards from the house, his voice sharp despite the seemingly courteous tone. I see you found some help getting my future property in order. Your property? Jack took a step forward. I haven't signed any papers, Granger. This land still belongs to my family. Not for long. Granger smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've uncovered some irregularities in your father's property deeds. Unpaid taxes, poorly defined boundaries. The court will grant me seizure in less than a month. You're lying. Mrs. Green, isn't it? Granger turned his attention to her, his gaze sweeping over her with an unpleasant arrogance. The courageous widow who gave up her little ranch to play farmer here. I hope you haven't invested too much hope in this adventure. We won't give up, Martha said in a firm voice, squeezing Nora's hand in hers. Granger let out a cold laugh. Really? Even when you find out your new protector lied to you? He signaled to one of his men who handed him a bundle of papers. Go ahead and show her, Carter. Show her the debts you've racked up, the mortgages you've taken out to try and save this dying land. Jack paled, but didn't move. Martha knows everything she needs to know. Really? Granger dismounted and approached dangerously. Does she know you borrowed against the ranch to pay for your dying fiancé's medical care? Does she know you already owe more than this property is worth? The silence that followed was broken only by the whistling wind. Martha looked at Jack, searching for a denial in his eyes, but found only deep pain and shame. Jack, she whispered. It's true, he confessed in a broken voice. June was sick, very sick. The doctors, the treatments, I mortgaged half the ranch. When she died, I had huge debts and no way to pay them back. You see, Mrs. Green? Granger triumphed. Your hero has dragged you down with him. You'd better take your children and leave now before this whole mess costs you the little you have left. Martha looked at Jack, then her children, then this ranch they'd rebuilt together with so much love and hope. The wind intensified, making the house's beams groan and the snow swirl around them. Then slowly she let go of Nora's hand and stepped forward towards Granger. "You know what, Mr. Granger? You're right about one thing." Her voice was calm, but charged with a new authority. "Jack should have told me the truth sooner, but you're wrong about the main thing." "Oh, really? And what's that?" "You think money and papers make a place valuable. But this land isn't worth anything because of what's written in your ledgers. It's worth everything because of what we've put into it ourselves." Granger scoffed. "Fine words, ma'am. But banks don't feed on sentiment." "Maybe not," Martha replied, "but people do." At that moment, the sound of more horses echoed in the valley. Tom Henderson appeared at a gallop, followed by the McCreadys, the Wilsons, and other families Martha didn't know yet. About 20 riders converged on the ranch, circling Granger's men. "What's the meaning of this?" Granger asked, suddenly less sure of himself. Tom Henderson dismounted. "It means, Elias, that we've had enough of your ways." He turned to Martha and Jack. "We talked last night. Every family here will contribute to paying off the ranch's debts." "You don't have that kind of money," Granger protested. "Together we do," Ellen McCready declared, stepping forward. "And we've got something else you don't, Elias. We've got friends." The wind suddenly died down as if it too was waiting for what would happen next. In that silence, Martha understood they'd gained something more precious than a ranch. A community. Jack, tears in his eyes, approached Martha. "I'm sorry, I should have told you." "Later," she whispered. "We'll talk later." Granger remounted his horse, furious. "This isn't over, Carter. I'll have this land." "No," a clear voice said. It was Nora stepping forward, holding a notebook in her hand. "You won't have it." Everyone turned to the 12-year-old girl. "I checked your papers, Mr. Granger. The dates don't match. The taxes you claim are unpaid were settled last year. I've got the receipts." Granger's face fell. "How can you read and count?" Nora smiled. "Mama taught me, and Mr. Carter showed me where Papa kept all the ranch documents." Martha looked at her daughter with immense pride. This child she'd protected from the harshness of the world had just saved them all. "Looks like your scheme's been exposed, Granger," Tom Henderson observed. "I suggest you leave, now." Granger's men exchanged worried glances. Faced with 20 determined farmers, they no longer had the advantage of numbers. "You haven't seen the last of me," Granger growled, spurring his horse. When the group disappeared over the horizon, kicking up a cloud of snow, a strange silence settled. Then Will started to laugh, a clear, joyful sound that lightened the atmosphere. "We won?" he asked. "We won," Martha confirmed. The wind began to blow again, but gently this time, carrying the scent of fresh snow and renewed hope. Martha looked around her. Her family, her new friends, this land they'd saved together. For the first time since William's death, she truly felt at home. When the neighbors left, promising to return the next day to celebrate, Martha and Jack found themselves alone with the children in the kitchen, warmed by the hearth. The snow continued to fall outside, creating a cocoon of silence around the house. "We need to talk," Martha said, pouring hot tea into the mismatched mugs. Jack nodded, his face etched with guilt. Nora and Will, sensing the tension, quietly slipped off to their rooms. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" Martha asked, not with anger, just with deep sadness. Jack turned his mug between his hands. "Because I was ashamed. June died partly because of me. I spent our entire future to buy a few more months, a few treatments that didn't do any good. It wasn't your fault, Jack. It was." His voice broke. "If I'd married her sooner, if I'd noticed her illness faster, if I'd had more money." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears. "When you arrived with your children, I saw a chance to start over. But I knew if you knew the truth, you'd leave." Martha sat down across from him. The wind blew softly against the window panes, carrying the whisper of accumulating snow. "Jack, look at me." She waited for him to meet her gaze. "Do you think I would have stayed 6 months with William if he'd had no faults? Do you think love means never making mistakes? It's not the same thing." "Yes, it is. It's exactly the same thing." Martha placed her hand on Jack's. "You loved June enough to risk everything for her. I loved William despite his tendency to drink when the harvests were bad. Love isn't perfection. It's choosing to stay despite the flaws. Jack looked at her, as if she'd just offered him a forgiveness he hadn't dared to hope for. But we're not William and June, Martha continued. We're us, with our stories, our mistakes, our scars, and we have the right to build something different. What do you mean? Martha took a deep breath. I mean, I love you, Jack Carter. Not despite your mistakes, but with them, because they're part of the man you are. The silence that followed was so deep that all they could hear was the crackling fire and the whisper of the wind outside. Then Jack stood, walked around the table, and took Martha in his arms. I love you too, he whispered against her hair. I didn't think I could love again, but you taught me that the heart could be bigger than fear. Outside, the snowstorm intensified, but in the kitchen of Dusty Ridge Ranch, two wounded souls had just discovered they could heal together. And now? Jack asked. Martha smiled. That smile she'd thought lost with William. Now we keep going, all four of us, like a real family. Spring arrived like a promise kept. The snow slowly melted, revealing fertile ground ready to welcome new beginnings. Martha and Jack had announced their intention to marry in May, and the entire valley was preparing to celebrate this union, which symbolized much more than a simple marriage. The April wind carried new scents. Buds, fresh grass, and that particular smell of awakening earth. Martha worked in the garden she'd expanded, planting the vegetable seeds June had once chosen. Strangely, it didn't bother her. She honored June's memory by continuing her projects, just as Jack honored William by caring for his children. Mama, Will cried from the corral. Look what I built. Martha straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. Her son had finished his first beehive, meticulously following the instructions from the book Nora had found in town. The object was perfectly assembled, each plank fitted with a craftsman's precision. Your father would have been proud, she said, caressing Will's hair. And June would have been too, added Jack, who was coming from the fields, a radiant smile on his face. She always said bees were the best judges of a place's character. Nora came out of the house carrying a tray with tea and biscuits she'd learned to make with Ellen Henderson. 14 years old now, she'd gained confidence and managed the ranch's finances with an efficiency that impressed even Tom Henderson. The McCreadys just arrived, she announced. They've got news from town. Indeed, a whole delegation of neighbors was coming up the driveway. Tom Henderson led the group, a wide smile lighting up his weathered face. Jack, Martha, he cried, dismounting. You're not going to believe what happened. Granger? Jack asked, worried. Granger's gone. Ellen McCready clasped her hands with joy. His partners kicked him out of the bank when they found out about his schemes. He left the valley yesterday morning. Martha felt a huge weight lift from her shoulders. For good? For good, Tom confirmed. And that's not all. The railroad company changed its plans. They're going to build their line further north, across Peterson's land, and he wanted to sell. The wind blew harder as if to definitively carry away the last clouds that had hovered over their happiness. Martha looked around her. This ranch they'd saved together. These friends who'd become an extended family. These children who'd found a new father. And this man who'd given her back a taste for the future. You know what that means? Jack asked, taking her by the waist. It means we're truly free, Martha replied. Will ran to them, closely followed by Courage, the kitten who'd grown into a sturdy cat. Can we really stay forever? Forever, Jack promised, ruffling the boy's hair. Nora approached and snuggled against her mother. It's weird, she whispered. I feel like Papa and June are watching us and smiling. Martha looked up at the sky where white clouds raced in the spring wind. Me too, honey. Me too. The wedding day arrived with perfect gentleness. A light wind blew from the valley, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the hum of bees that had made their home in Will's beehive. Dusty Ridge Ranch, renamed Sunrise Valley Ranch, gleamed under the May sun. Martha stood in her room adjusting the simple but elegant dress Ellen Henderson had sewn for the occasion. It wasn't the virginal white of her first union, but a sky blue that recalled the curtains June had once chosen, a subtle tribute to the woman who had led them to each other. You look beautiful, Mama, Nora said, arranging apple blossoms in Martha's hair. Do you think this is okay, what we're doing? Martha asked, suddenly emotional. Will, buttoning his clean shirt, stopped short. You mean marrying Jack? Martha nodded, searching for the right words. Your father. Papa would have wanted us to be happy. Nora interrupted with a wisdom that always surprised Martha. And Jack makes us happy. He makes you happy. Outside, guests were taking their seats in the garland-decorated yard. The entire community had come. The Hendersons, the McCreadys, the Wilsons, and even families from neighboring valleys who'd heard about this symbolic union. Reverend Morrison, a gentle white-haired man, waited near the rose arch Jack had built especially for the ceremony. The groom stood beside him, elegant in his dark suit, eyes fixed on the house door. When Martha appeared on Will's arm, who'd insisted on walking her down the aisle, a murmur of admiration swept through the attendees. But Jack saw only her, this courageous woman who'd transformed her survival into hope, her solitude into family. My dear friends, the Reverend began, we are gathered today to celebrate the union of Martha and Jack, but also the birth of a new family and a new home. The wind gently picked up, making the ribbons dance and carrying the sacred words skyward. Martha and Jack exchanged their vows, simple and sincere, promising to love each other through joy and hardship, to cherish their children, and to honor the memory of those who had loved them before. You may kiss your bride, said the Reverend. When Jack took Martha in his arms, cheers erupted, mingled with the sound of the wind in the trees and the joyful hum of the bees. Nora and Will threw themselves into their arms, creating a family embrace that definitively sealed their union. Later, as the celebration was in full swing and musicians had couples dancing under the stars, Martha slipped away for a moment. She walked to the small graveyard they'd set up on the hill, where Jack's parents now rested and where a stone symbolically marked the memory of William and June. Thank you, she whispered to the wind that caressed the new wheat stalks. Thank you for leading us to each other. Jack joined her, slipping his hand into hers. Together they looked at their ranch, their family, their future stretching out before them like fertile land ready to be tilled. The wind blew one last time, carrying with it the promise of all the springs to come. Did this story touch your heart? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more moving stories. Leave a like if you enjoyed this saga, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Your support allows us to continue sharing these moments of beauty and hope with you.